Fans, welcome to another edition of the Old School Shooters podcast. My name is Jack Kilby from Great North Wrestling, and tonight we are very, very blessed to have Mr. William Harding of the famous Sugar Hold Challenge on the podcast. Hello, William. And of course,
hello, Jack.
Hey,
King.
We always have the one, the only, and very. I would the term Columbo-esque tonight with the look be accurate? The King of Connecticut. How are you, King?
I'm doing great, and I'm always, solving the mysteries, and I want to solve the mystery of William Harding. He's got an amazing story, and I want to do a tribute to Mr. Harding. I got an opportunity to spend some time years ago in his hometown, Frankfort, Kentucky, and I poured some Buffalo Trace bourbon here tonight for my cocktail, and I'm going to mix it. I'm going to mix it in my glass here, and got a little mixer, and this is certainly a tribute to Kentucky. And I used to go there years ago. I worked for 9 years for Northeast Beverage, those guys. And it was a funny story. We represented the Sazerac brands starting in 2001. And Sazerac was Dr. McGillicuddy's, and they had a product called Fireball that didn't sell that well back in those days. It was like the lower seller between with the French Kiss, which was the vanilla liqueur, and the Dr. McGillicuddy's menthol mint. This is going back, over 20 years. And now that's the number one selling spirit in the country, Fireball. And they're part of Sazerac and part of Buffalo Trace, the same conglomerate. So we used to have our sales meetings, our annual sales meetings there. It was 3 years that I got an opportunity to go out there. I started with the company in the mid 90s, but we began to represent Sazerac at that point in around 2001. And I left Connecticut in the very beginning of 2005. So we had those 3 years, and it was guys like myself. I was an on-premise sales manager at that point. We had guys names like Tony Tornaquindisi, Johnny V, John Vitrano, Martino Giuliano, Joe Marcio, all of us guys at that point that were kind of old school Northern guys going down to Kentucky. So it was kind of like my cousin Vinny back then. And we had some fun times at the Buffalo Trace distillery. They had the log cabins out there, and we had a blast and got to try the true moonshine, which is the whiskey right out White Lightning right before they ever cut it. And some great memories, some stories I even can't tell from your hometown. We had some wild times there. But man, I've heard Mr. Harding's story. We have a mutual friend in Mr. Adam Newsom, and Jake Shannon and I were just on his podcast as guests, and he had his story fits in perfectly with this show that we're doing, Jack, with the Old School Shooters.
Well, before we get into the actual story itself, I just wanted to ask you, William, about your fandom in pro wrestling. And I understand that you were a fan of the business growing up, and particularly the Memphis territory. And I've heard you mention a couple of names that you're particular fans of, and just thought that it might be great for the Hannibal TV viewers to hear about your recollections of Memphis around that 1980, early 80s, late 70s time period.
Well, the advantage I had at that time was that my father was a police officer in Frankfort, and he would work those shows for that group. The Frankfort Civic Center would always hire out local police officers to do security for all the promotions that came in, no matter what they were promoting. And So when he would go down there, I'd get to go backstage, and I would have to sit back there, and I'd basically be the door opener for all these guys. So I got to see, people like Jerry Lawler and Tojo Yamamoto, Jerry Jarrett, the Assassins, Bill Dundee, all those guys. And they were more like friends than they were, wrestlers, because I'd see what was going on backstage. And it was a lot of fun to hang out with them. And then I would go out there at showtime and just kind of hang around in the audience and watch the shows. But I think Tojo was probably my favorite because, it was at a time that I was into martial arts. So you could hear those chop slaps of his in the upper end of the arena. That guy was brutal, man. He was just something to watch back then. The whole thing was just something to watch. It was a really magical experience back then.
Now, this ICW promotion under Angelo Poffo was the promotion that was offering the challenge. Just out of curiosity, set the viewers back to where you were at that time, how you heard about it, and what made you decide as a relative youngster that this was something that you wanted to go and throw your hat in.
Well, it was in May of 1981, and ICW appeared on, I think it was WTVQ, out of Lexington. I was in Frankfort in the Colony subdivision, and I'm sitting there and I'm watching TV, and they're getting ready to do a promo, and Bob Roop comes out to the table, and he's got this bag with him. And he opens this bag and he starts spreading this bag of silver dollars all the way across the table. It's 1,000 silver dollars. And he says, I have this hold. It's called the Sugar Hold. It's open to anybody, professionals, amateurs alike. If you think you can beat this hold, come on down and you get your chance. And I think they were trying it at a couple different arenas because it seems like I remember them showing some clips of people trying it and not doing so well at it. But one of the places they were going to do it was in Frankfurt at the Civic Center. So I thought, well, okay, June 3rd, 1981, I'm going to be at the Civic Center to go down there and do it. The reason I got into it was I had started martial arts in 1973 in a style called Chidakai Karate under Sensei George Van Horn. And I also went to his dojo before it closed down there. And I studied off and on through those years as you could, because as you can imagine in Frankfort, Kentucky in the 70s, there's not a lot of martial arts schools to go around. It's not like it is today. Judo got offered in 1977. I started studying it then. Tournaments were non-existent. So there really wasn't a good way to test yourself against anybody. So I really didn't know where I was as far as my training was going, because I was training in everything. And when this came up, I thought, okay, Bob Roop's a legit guy. He was an Olympian. He was an NCAA champion. He's like that era's Kurt Angle, basically. And I thought, well, I'll try this and see what I can do. And so that's how the Sugar Hole Challenge got into my life. So I didn't really know how to get out of the hole. And I'm sure you all seen the hole, right?
Oh, yeah.
I know
Yeah,
Matthew
absolutely.
knows the hole.
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah.
Yeah. It's a difficult hole.
Absolutely.
The way I've tried to explain it to people, when I explain what I did, it makes sense. What it is I sketched this thing out because we didn't have a VCR or anything. This was 81. Okay. I sketched it out, and I'm sitting there in my leather ottoman or leather chair. Got my feet up on the ottoman. I'm looking at this sketch, and I can't figure this thing out to save my life. I'm staring at it for 30 minutes. And I threw the sketch down on the ottoman, and I got up and I went into the kitchen to get something to eat. And when I came back, I went to sit my stuff down, and I'm looking down at the sketch, except I'm looking at it from a different angle now. I'm looking at it from the side, and it looks like the people are standing up. Now, if you take a sugar hold in your mind and you stand it up, it's a standing hip toss. The first week judo, the first thing you're ever going to learn in judo, it's a standing hip toss. The only thing is the person who's executing the toss is the one who's in the sugar hold. The person that's defending is the one, all they got to do is reach down, grab that leg, lift you up, and drop you straight down into it. So I thought, okay, if we're going to start in hip toss, why not just execute the hip toss from the ground? You know, because every person I've ever seen try to get out of it, they try to expand or contract. So when I went down there, that was the idea. So I went down to the YMCA and I practiced it with some friends of mine. And my idea was to just go ahead and execute the hip toss and bring him on over. Get my leg to do well. We came the night of the challenge. I went down there, and they had, I think there was about 3 or 4 matches before they got around to us. And I just sat up in the stands, and every time a match would come up, I just dropped my head down like this, and I wouldn't look at the matches. I was just trying to focus on what I was going to do. And then they finally, at intermission time, they finally called for us. And there were 4 of us that went down there. And Bob came over and he looked at all of us and he decided to take us all by size. And that means I was going to be last because, you know, I'm 5'7" at the time, I weigh 155 pounds. And the first guy, I'll never forget this guy. He's a taller guy. He looked like Lyle Lovett with the hair and everything. He wore this black silk shirt and these black blue jeans and cowboy boots. And he got in, he kind of had a mouth on him, and he was kind of being rude. Sugar hole. Referee said go. This guy screamed to high heaven. I mean, he was in there 3 seconds screaming to get out. Bob let him go. And he got up and he was disgusted and he walked out of the ring not happy. So the second guy got in there and made a pretty good go of it. Lasted about 10 seconds. And then the third guy was the one I was worried about because I talked to him a little bit. And if I remember correctly, he was in the he might be able to do this. So he gets in there and he lasts about 15 seconds and then he finally taps out. He doesn't scream or anything. He makes a pretty good go of it. So now I've got to get in the ring. And by this time, everybody's just getting a good laugh out of it because, you know, he's making short work of all these people. And I get in, I don't even look at him in the face. So I just laid down and he said, well, okay then. So he gets down, he wondering when he's going to say go because it's like this second, you know, you can see everything starting to move in slow motion. It's just like everything is starting to slow down. And my impetus was when this guy said go, I'm going between the G and the O. Okay. So referee says go. As soon as he says go, I go as hard as I can. And I bring Bob over face first into the mat. I plant my right arm down on the mat. And now I've got him sort of in an arm bar. And I'm leaning into it. Oh, the crowd just changed. The crowd just jumps up and they start screaming. And I'm just trying to fight it to keep him down, but I can't get my legs out because he's still on my back. So I'm stuck now. And the only thing I could figure out to do, and even now I look back on this, and this was really stupid, but the only thing I can figure out to do is to do a push-up in order to get him up far enough where I can slide my legs underneath of him and get to his back like I had originally planned to do. So my left arm is kind of hung up with this, so all I can do is get my fingers down on the mat. And I've got my head planted on the mat where he can't use his arm to compress my head with the sugar hold. So at this point, I put my right arm down and I start to do a push-up, which is basically a one-arm push-up with my right arm. And I bring him all the way up. And I'm basically looking down at my feet, trying to time where I can unweight him enough to get my feet out. Well, that doesn't work because like the millisecond before I can do this, he grabs my leg again, flips me back around, and I land on my back instead of my side. And as soon as I landed on my back, I kicked my legs up and I scissor locked his head. So now neither one of us are in just any kind of real comfortable position at the moment because my head is still cradled in his arm. So my nose is like 8 inches away from my own right knee. And I'm just trying to, okay, I thought, well, it's going to be a war of attrition here. Who's going to give up first? So I'm pushing back and pulling my legs away, simultaneously squeezing as hard as I can. And I could just, I hear him go, damn, this boy's strong. You know, that just jazzes me up even further. So I'm still fighting it and still fighting it, still fighting it. Referee's constantly asking me if I want to give up. And at one point, I just told him to stop asking. And he got mad at me about that. Tough luck. Finally, I felt his cradle arm give way just enough where I got my head out. And I slid my head out. And I jumped back and I rolled him over to the side. I still had him in the scissor lock. And I let the scissor lock go and I kicked away from him and I jumped up. And then I realized what I did, and I threw my hands up in the air, and I turned around and looked at the audience. Everybody's up screaming. The referee and Bob are still on the mat, and I turned around and looked at the audience behind me, and they're jumping up and down screaming. And when I turned back around, the referee's on his feet, and he's going, no, 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 you didn't beat the time limit. And this is when it all goes haywire. What the hell are you talking about? There wasn't any time. They never announced one. And he said, yeah, there was a 60-second time limit and you didn't beat it. And I'm like, you guys were still on the ground when I got up, you know. I said, why are you bringing this up now? And then I looked at Bob. I said, this is BS. I mean, if you don't think I beat you, get back down there and we'll do it again. And to be fair here, Bob said, he said, hold still for a second. And he walks over and he grabs each side of my head and he's looking real close in my face. And he said, you're injured. And I didn't know what he was talking about. But what happened was I ruptured a bunch of blood vessels in my left eye just from the pressure of the hold. And I mean, there was a lot of pressure. Luckily, I was just really flexible at the time. So it didn't bother me in that respect. But yeah, there was a lot of pressure on my neck. And to his credit, you know, he walked away from it at that point. I was mad. I wanted to do it again. I didn't realize what he was doing. But he actually kept me from getting further injured because I think if it had been anybody else, they'd have said, okay, well, let's get back down there and we'll do it again. You know? So he leaves the ring, the referee leaves the ring, and I'm just kind of standing there, and I walk over to the timekeeper's table, and I asked them if there was a time limit, and they said yes. And I said, all right, well, who is keeping time? Because neither one of you have a watch on. There's no clock here. You know, you don't even have anything to ring the bell with. Nobody rang a bell. Nothing. And they just kind of looked at each other, and they got up, and they walked away. And they didn't say a word. So now I'm in the ring all alone. Everybody's booing in the audience. Nobody really knows what's going on. I'm standing over at the other side of the ring looking back to where they come out at. And there's a friend of mine from high school sitting in the front row. His name is Steve Odden. Steve asked me, he said, what's going on? I said, Steve, I don't think they're going to pay me. And he said, grab the mic. That's a great idea. So I walked over and grabbed the mic off the table. First thing I said, I want my money. And everybody just went crazy over that. And this went on, you know, I kept saying that a couple of times, and this went on for about 4 or 5 minutes. minutes. And then right off the bat, because you can tell by the cowboy hat, it's Cowboy Bob Orton Jr. And he comes over to the edge of the ring and he says, "Hey, boy, put the microphone down. Come on. How's the profanity on the show? Is it okay?"
You can let loose, sir. No worries.
Okay.
Do it.
All right. He calls me over there, and I go over there, and I'm standing with my hands on the second rope. I got my head like almost through the second and third rope. And he said, "I want to tell you something." He said, "Bob Roop's a good guy, and it would be in your best interest to get out of the ring and forget about all this. Otherwise, I'm going to get in there and put you in a hold, make your tongue suck your dick." Okay. I really didn't know what to say. I'm not even sure if I said anything. All I could think of was just smack the crap out of him. But I kept thinking, if I did that, that's an out for them. If I hit him, then I'm going to jail. So I really didn't know what to do. So I just kind of stood there in the ring. He stood there taunting me for a minute or two, and then he walked to the back of the back. And he stands there in that little doorway back there kind of taunting me. And I said, "To hell with this." So I picked the microphone up. I said, "Bring me my money." And the crowd's getting antsy at this point. And then a couple of minutes later, here comes somebody else. I didn't realize who it was at first, but it was either Pez Whatley or Rip Rogers, but I think it was Pez Whatley coming out first. And had a pair of boxing gloves with him. And then here come Rip Rogers with a pair of boxing gloves. Now, I knew what was going on. Pez and Rip are going to have a 10-round boxing match in the middle of all this. I told this all to Jim Cornette, and he said, "Geez, how many gimmicks were they running that night?" And so they're shout out
to Rip Rogers. Shout out to Rip Rogers in the boxing, because years later he beat the hell out of Monty Cox, who I'm not a big fan of, MMA manager, in a boxing match. So Rip had some real boxing skills there.
Yeah. Well, he said later, Pez shot and I worked. But I didn't get to see much of that. I was still in the ring with them, and the arena manager comes over and he says, "You got to get out of the ring now." I said, "I'm not going anywhere until I get paid." And the cops come over there with him, and he said, "Get out or you're going to be arrested." So I thought, okay, fine. I got out of the ring thinking I'm going to go back to my seat. They take me in the back and they lock me up in a storage room, and they tell me to stay there until they can get me. And I'm like, "Why are you doing this to me?" I said, "I'm the one that got ripped off. Why are you doing this to me?" I couldn't believe it. So they left the room. There's a phone in this storage room. It's just full of junk, posters and just all kinds of junk. But there's a phone in here. So I picked the phone up and I called my stepmom, who's a court reporter, and I tell her what's going on. I said, "This is crazy. I got in here. I said, I beat this guy. They're not paying me. The cops got me locked up in the back. I need a lawyer down here fast." Because my dad just absolutely forbid me to come down here. So I knew I was going to be in trouble.
And wait now, and William, your dad was a police officer, right? In Frankfurt.
He was.
Your dad was an officer in Frankfurt.
For the state at that time. Yeah, he was during the early 70s when the Memphis promotion was there. But this was 81, and he was working for the state at that time. And so I called my stepmom, and I told her I needed a lawyer down there. And she said, "I'll see what I can do." And about that time, the policeman runs in. He tells me, "Put the phone down." I said, "I'm calling a lawyer." He said, "Put the phone down now, or I'm putting you in handcuffs." So I put the phone down. I told her I'll call her back later. And they stopped. So the arena manager comes in there and he says, I've talked to him. They said they don't feel like you broke the hold. They said, you're welcome to stay and watch the rest of the show if you'd like to stay. And I told him, I said, well, I did pay for a ticket, you know.
Yeah, it's so nice of
And
them.
yeah, I said you should probably go back and talk to him again. I'm pretty angry. We went back there and talked to him once more, and he came back and he told me the same thing. And I'm sitting there, and there's a poster and a pencil there, and I said, "Can I have one of these?" And I took a poster and a pencil from him, and I went back out there and I went looking for those first three guys. I said, "Okay, the hell with this. They're going to do this. I'm going to sue them. I'm just going to take them to court. I'm going to get those other three guys, and I'm just going to take them to court." So the first guy that was up there, embarrassed by the whole thing. The second and third guys signed it, and next thing I know, there were people asking me what was going on, and they all started signing. And next thing I know, there was like, 25, 30 people here. They're all signing this poster and stuff. And then I hear somebody saying, hey, Bill, and I turn around, and it's Sheriff Sam Herring, who my father knows really well. I knew him. And he said, aren't you Billy Harden's boy? And I said, yeah. He said, tell me what's going on. And I started to tell him. And as I'm telling him, here comes those two police officers. Now, I'm going to be arrested now for causing a disturbance because all these people are crowded around me. They're signing this thing. They're trying to find out what's going on. And it's causing a big mess while everything else is going on. I mean, they're still doing their boxing match at this time. And they take me back there again, away from Sam, and they lock me back up in that same room. So I sit back there for a few minutes, and then Sam Herring comes in, and he says, now tell me what was going on. And I told him. He said, you sit here for a few minutes. I'll be right back. So I sat there, and maybe 10, 15 minutes went by, and Sam walks in, and right behind him, Angelo Poffo, dressed in his miser gear, mask and everything. And he said, all right, how are we going to resolve this? And he said, will you take $250? $250 is good. Will that settle it? And I said, I just shook my head no. And he said, how about 500? 500 is a good amount. And I said, after what you guys put me through tonight, I'm not leaving here without $1,000. And he just looked at Sam and he shook his head and he walked away. And Sam you just sit here and we'll be right back. So they disappeared. I sat back there for about another 10 minutes or so. And then the policeman opened the door. And I thought at this point I was going to go to jail. And Sam came in. He said, come with me. So now I got Sam and the two police officers escorting me back out into the arena. And this is the part I can't remember if Roop and the referee and Angelo were in the ring yet or not. I don't know whether they came out after me or before me, but we all ended up in the ring. And I thought, okay, I guess we're going to do this again. So, Angelo takes the mic and he starts explaining to everybody that due to a miscommunication about the time limit, that they thought it would be in the best interest of everybody that we pay the boy and give him his $1,000. And my first thought was, he had a check in his hand. My first thought was, where's that bag of silver dollars at? Where'd that go?
It's going to bounce.
And, Bob told me later, he said, you can't stop payment on a bag of $1,000. And, but he gave me the check. Everybody's cheering out of the ring, and I started to make toward the exit because in my mind, I'm getting the hell out of here before somebody changes their mind. And I got outside and I screamed to high heaven, scared the crap out of a bunch of people out there, and I took off from my car and couldn't get my keys fast enough.
Man, what an awesome story.
Driving home was an ordeal because my dad had forbid me from going down there. He didn't want me to take part in this thing. So I was going to have to deal with that when I got there. And when I walked in and my stepmom was in the kitchen, I said, "Where's Dad?" And she said, he went down to the arena to get you. So he comes back about 30 minutes later. He comes back in about 30 minutes later, and he just gives me this death stare, and he starts screaming at me for like 2 minutes straight. "I told you not to go down there. I told you not to get in the ring with that guy." And after this, he just stopped. He just stopped dead cold. And he just looked at me. He said, "Let me see the check." There you go. And it turned into one of those funny little stories that he told, all the people in the bar and stuff. And it was something else. It really was. But I have to credit my instructors, my judo instructors, my karate instructors, Sensei Van Horn, Sensei Demetrius, Sensei Fox. They were all great guys. It was part of that whole old school mentality back then. And I really enjoyed going to martial arts. And I stayed in it for 35 years, and I studied different styles. And I enjoyed teaching, but that was just a really different time back then.
Yeah.
Started because of Bruce Lee, just like many did.
So, William, to unpack your story here, there's so much there. First of all, is the show Old Goose Shooters. We like to educate the fans on the history of combat sports and the history of professional wrestling. And you were a fan growing up in the Memphis territory. Right. And my mentor and coach and almost a second father to me was Billy Wicks, who came out of the Memphis territory and came out of collegiate wrestler that went into the Carnies. And people know him for his feud with Sputnik Monroe. And he used to do those fan challenges out of the crowd for the Memphis promotion, but before that in the Carnies. So there's such a long tradition there. And there's some examples over the years of like yours, but no story that is as incredible as yours. But Tim Woods, Mr. Wrestling #1, literally had his finger bitten off by a fan in a challenge to see if the fan could last with him. And then if you really fast forward to the Tough Enough, they did that with Kurt Angle, and Daniel Puder ended up hooking Kurt Angle, in that challenge. But your story is, but look at the size difference. Your story is so much different. And what I wanted to ask you, Mr. Harding, is you had spoken on other broadcasts about how you analyzed and you studied Bob Roop's Sugar Hold. So if you could talk more about that, because you didn't just go in there blind. You really had spent a lot of time studying the hold.
Well, that goes back to an old story that I heard. When I first started martial arts, and what's got me started was the day Bruce Lee died. They aired a bunch of footage of him, and the first thing I ever saw of him, besides watching Kato, as everybody did at my age, was the scene from Enter the Dragon with the nunchucks, that famous scene. And I thought, that's beautiful. That's an art. I need to learn that. At 11 years old, I thought that was probably the most beautiful thing I'd ever seen. And there was a story, and you'll forgive me if I go into this a little bit, but this old ancient story about a master who was teaching 3 students, and a tiger attacked. I'm going to shorten this. A tiger attacked. The master killed the tiger with 1 shot. He turns around to his students and he says, "Would you like to learn that technique?" So he asked the first student and said, "Yes, master, I'd like to learn that technique if it's your wish to teach me." And he asked the second student, and he got the same response. "Yes, I'd like to learn that if it's your wish to teach me." And when he got to the third student, he said, "Yes, master, if it's your wish to teach me that, I will learn it, but I would rather learn the counter to it." So that's the first thing I started thinking of. A lot of us get into martial arts and we're thinking of all these blinding kicks and amazing punches and all these great things we can do. But there's a lot of people that pass up on how do you defend yourself? If you got a kick coming at you, there's a lot of people that just don't know how to defend that. Why am I going to stand here and do this in a block if somebody can hit me faster than I can block? If I can throw 3 punches at somebody before they can respond, what good is a block? So that's the way that I took it. And it was good to read the philosophy of the movie. And the one thing that changed my mind about how to fight in these situations was a movie, and it wasn't even Bruce Lee. It was Sonny Chiba, the Street Fighter, because he was just straight out kill him. During my first lessons at the dojo, our instructors, if you go to a dojo now, it's about sportsmanship. It's about respect, and it was about respect back then too. But the whole idea was, if somebody throws a punch at you, break their arm. If somebody throws a kick at you, break their leg. You do what you have to do to end the fight. That's what we were being taught. And we didn't have the kicking pads. We didn't have all that. And I was 11 years old. Most of the people in my dojo were 15, 16 years old. So fighting against bigger people was not that big a deal. You're going to have to fight bigger people. If you want to get better, you're going to have to fight better people. You can't just stay in this one lane all the time. You have to go out and seek out the people that are better than you. Because it's you got to find those humbling experiences to find out where your mistakes are. Because I was riding an emotional high from this Sugar Hole challenge. And I thought I was it. And I totally forgot about a lesson my father taught me, that there's always somebody out there that's got your number. Always somebody out there. And 6 months after this happened, and I know you guys probably remember this, Art Door, the Tough Man contest.
Oh, yeah.
The original Tough Man contest. That came to Frankfurt. So guess who has got the big head and thinks, I'm going to get in that. I'm going to win another $1,000. This guy right here, this dumbass right here. And that's where I learned a very humbling lesson, that the difference between what I do and wrestling and boxing, they're different. It's a whole different ball game between martial arts and boxing. It's because I had nobody to train with at the time. I got in the ring and I wailed at the guy. And all I could do up to that point was practice cardio. I didn't have anybody to spar with when I did the Tough Man contest. And I'm 155 pounds fighting in a 170-pound division because I had to lie about my weight to get into the contest at all. And I got beat up. Now, it was a good fight. Art Door actually came to me after the fight and asked me to come back for the second night. But I learned real quick that I was not a boxer. And I had a lot to learn from that. And that it taught me there's a whole nother aspect of self-defense that I needed to learn. So I started taking up boxing, which was a great sport by itself. But I got in there and I started wailing away in the first round. And my arms felt like 200-pound bags of wet cement by the time the first round was over. And I could barely lift them. And me and this other guy named Jerry Cartwright, we just wailed on each other for 3 rounds. And when I got out of the ring, I was so out of it. They had us all sitting on a stage waiting to go up there and get the ring. And when I got out of the ring, I started walking toward a concession stand. And I stopped. And I'm just standing there staring at the concession stand. And my father comes over. And he says, "What's the matter?" I said, "Where'd the stage go? Who moved the stage? Did they move the stage while I was in the ring?" I turned around. It's behind. I thought literally they had moved this. I was that out of it. And when I got back to the dressing room and they hit me with the oxygen and everything, I just passed out. And then Art Door comes around saying, "Come on back tomorrow night. You put on such a good fight. We'll find you somebody to fight."
Yeah, that's
because
awesome.
you
You
have to
know,
fight 4 fights to get to the money, and they're all 90-second rounds.
that the original Tough Man, goes back to, I've had the pleasure now to coach for a school in Titusville down here in Florida. And Phil Collins, I always kind of put over on this show, not the rocker, but he's an old time American kickboxer and karate guy. He's an older guy now. And he came
Yep.
up with Donnie Hare and Don the Dragon Wilson. And he's an old rugged guy, and he'll fight anybody. And you came
Right.
out of that era of those dojos, where really old school dojos where you'd fight anybody.
Right. Exactly. I mean, it's something that we were discussing earlier. We mentioned on touching on the phrase old school. Well, it's not really old school to me, because it's just the way it is. That people point back to that film of Bob Roop in the snake pit with that guy, where he's putting him in the sugar hole and putting him through the paces. And I talked to Bob about it. Bob and I did a panel together at the Championship Wrestling for Florida convention in 2018. We talked about all this, fans there. And I talked to him about that. And I said, even I knew that guy was just not trained to do anything. And I mean, he put him through it. And people look at it now and they say, oh, he was brutalizing and stuff like that. It's not the way you looked at it back then. You get in there and disrespect these guys, they're going to teach you a lesson.
Yeah, we just had the pleasure, Jack and I, of having Jerry Briscoe on the show. And when Jerry and I were talking about this, the old school, and that's the way that I learned pro wrestling. You know what Pops taught me, what Billy Wicks taught me. You tell those fat slobs that pay to see you, there's not a damn thing that I do in this ring that I can't do to any one of you. And it's kind of been lost in the last 15 years or so. I mentioned to Jerry, I did You Want to Be a Wrestler in South Carolina back in the day on Wednesday nights when I first came down to South Carolina, and I was too big. And they brought a guy in who had wrestled at UNC, but he was a cokehead. He was a drug addict, let's be honest. And the promoter paid him in drugs to stretch guys, but he was such a good wrestler that he'd have these guys come in that knew nothing about wrestling, and he could hurt them. And that's the old school way in professional wrestling is, we're going to hurt you and we're going to send you on your way. And then you're going to tell people what happened, and we're going to bruise you up with the cross faces and some dirty wrestling. And that's been lost today. Largely that's the old school, and that's really your story. I mean, that's what Bob Roop was doing, in Florida and then up there in Kentucky. And we should probably say this, that just to put this in perspective for people that don't know it, is Angelo Poffo was the Macho Man Randy Poffo, Randy Savage's father, and Lenny Poffo's father. And he was known as the Miser, and that was a true-to-life gimmick for him. He was really a miser. And his promotion that you did that for at the time, they had TV, but they were kind of considered an outlaw promotion.
Right.
Back in the day.
3 promotions that really didn't want them.
Yeah.
If I could jump in here, William, I wanted to ask you, your story has been called one of the most significant of the territory era for a reason. And that consensus seems to be that by doing what you did, you had the potentiality of, exposing the business, if you will. And I'm just wondering what your thoughts are. Well, actually, it's a 2-part question. Do you think that this sort of thing isn't done in the modern era due to the fact that there's, a dojo almost on every corner? and you never know what you're going to get if you called somebody out. And secondly, what was the impact on Bob Roop himself in terms of his career thereafter this?
Bob left ICW, I think it was about 6 months after that, and he went to Louisiana. He told me the story about going to Angelo's house to get money because he had 10% of the promotion. Bob Orton Jr. had 10%. I think Rip had 10%. Who was not Ron Wright? It may have been Ron Wright or Malenko, one of those guys. So he's going to meet Angelo at his house in Paducah to get his money out. And he said, I went down there. He said, I had a baseball bat and a box cutter in my pocket. And he said, that son of a bitch had Randy Savage stay home. Then Randy was supposed to be in Illinois that night. And he had Randy stay there in case I was going to cause a problem. And I said, well, Bob, you took a box cutter and a baseball bat with you. And never said a word about it to anybody. I thought that was just between him and me. And then we're doing that panel down in Florida, and he blurts that out to everybody there. And I just look at him and like, I thought that was a secret between us, but I guess not. So
I'll tell you,
it's just a different mentality. I mean, it's kind of like, go ahead. I'm sorry.
No, I was just gonna add a little anecdotal story to that ties in with that. If you read Mark Hewitt's book, Catch Wrestling, he talks about my old coach and mentor Billy Wicks on a Christmas night when he was wrestling there in that territory, and the promoter had a blackjack, didn't want to pay him, and one of the famous story is Pops took the blackjack from him and nearly beat him to death with it. But those guys were always, those are the stories that I always heard, from Frankie Kane and from Billy Wicks about the old school pro wrestling days. And it's so much different now. It seems like it's a different mentality, and I think we need to bring it back somewhat to the old school.
Well, I think in southeastern Kentucky, I mean, there's some really good standard bearers keeping it going down there. Like I said, after the story came back out in 2017, I got involved with Appalachian Mountain Wrestling, and I started filming for them. And their stuff was airing on the CBS affiliate. A lot of the AMW stuff you see on YouTube is my footage. And I got to know Ken Cantrell, a friend of ours, and Adam Newsom over at BCW.
Yeah.
Another really good old school promotion that I definitely want to mention is Bo James and Southern States Wrestling out of Kingsport, Tennessee. I mean, these are promotions that go old. If you want to see old school wrestling, those are the ones to go watch, because that's what you're going to get. And that's what attracted me to them, because I could go down there and watch people like, the real deal, Derek Neal, who's just an awesome performer. I love watching him wrestle. Newest guy out there, Big Rig Jake Brake, 7 foot, 450 pounds. I put a picture of him out there, and people were wondering why he's not in the WWE yet. Managers like Lemon Juice McGee, people like that. They're just really good people down there that they should pay attention to. And it's some guys that are now getting named. Jordan Clearwater, he's out there on the West Coast now. He got really good. A guy I know that you all are probably familiar with by now, the Progressive Liberal, Daniel Richards. I was there to see that whole thing get started. And it's been a wild ride. And the thing is that when I did that thing back then, I wasn't working anywhere at the time, and I debated for a fleet second about asking Angelo for a job in lieu of the money. And Bob told me I was better off with the money, and I did take the money. But it's always something that's stuck in the back of my mind, that what's it like? I want to see behind the curtain. I want to see how it goes. And I got back there and I started working with these guys, and I see the dedication, I see the hard work, I see a lot more go into it than a lot of people give people credit for. I would not, me personally, I thought I could be a wrestler. I even asked in 1979, I asked Dale Mann to join the promotion in Georgetown, Kentucky. And he said they didn't need anybody. And I said, okay, fine. And I never thought any more about it. And I just went on about my business. Now, if you do that today, people will get hurt. People get hurt, get their hurt feelings about it. But I knew I wasn't the size, because you had to be 6 foot or better back then. If you were smaller than that, you weren't going to be a wrestler. It was just a different time.
Yeah, you mentioned Adam
now.
Newsom. I just wanted to say, you mentioned Adam Newsom and you mentioned Ken and Lisa Cantrell, and I want to give them a shout out because back in 2016,
right,
I had a feud with Adam that actually started in MMA. We were all part of a show called Warrior Island, James B. Jefferson's MMA reality show. And Adam and I got into it on the mats at Shattuck MMA in Maryland. And he was going into pro wrestling. And we took that feud from MMA into pro wrestling. And it was the North versus South. And it was a very, very old school feud and a very old school promotion there, Bluegrass Championship Wrestling. And it was my pleasure to go there and wrestle Adam for the BCW title. And they have a great thing going on down there. And I want to mention this to you, because William, because I was just on Adam Newsom's podcast with a gentleman who Jack and I have coming on, Jake Shannon, who has Shoot Pro Wrestling. Now, this is something I think you're going to love. We've had 3 shows. I'm part of the broadcast team and in the business development side. And we have current UFC fighters. We actually have a matchmaker, Colin Crandall, that interviews UFC fighters that fight every weekend, booking current UFC fighters. We have world-class grapplers, world-class collegiate wrestlers. And in the ring, Shoot Pro Wrestling is a shoot 100%. But outside the ring, it's wild attitude era stuff. And we're bringing a 4-man Shoot Pro Wrestling tournament to Great North Wrestling, to Jack's promotion up there in the Great Northwest in Canada, where it's actually going to be the first show that Jack is doing in the States, in upstate New York. And it's a wild promotion. It's a grappling promotion, but it's really a return to the roots of professional wrestling.
That's good. That's good. I look forward to seeing that.
Yeah, I can actually send you some of our shows.
I've been watching. I don't watch a lot of.
I'm sorry. I was going to say I can send you some of our shows. We've had 3 shows so far, and we even had a shoot tag team tournament. That's pretty wild. And I'll send you the links on our group chat with Jack, so you can check it out. But we're really excited to bring it up to Jack. And Jack, why don't you tell William a little bit about Great North Wrestling?
Well, Great North Wrestling is a well-established promotion that has operated out of Ontario and Quebec, as well as other locations. Due to the COVID situation, we're on a little bit of a hiatus, but we're in the process right now, and upcoming in the next few weeks, we're going to have a major announcement about our first event, and we plan to run a number of shows episodically throughout Ontario and Quebec to start, and looking perhaps with the help of some of our friends in upstate New York, Watertown. Big shout out to the Ayatollah bin Hameen and the Hameen Media Group, who's a friend of mine. We'll be looking at running a show for the first time ever in Watertown. So all these are in development right now, but we're looking at going back to the roots of what professional wrestling really was, and less of the high flying spot fests and more of the mat based grappling that we all grew up and loved. Especially, even though I'm Canadian, I have ties to the United States and was fortunate enough to see Jim Crockett Promotions as a kid, and was a huge mark for Ole Anderson, Arn Anderson, and that mat based style. So we're looking to do throwback. I don't want to use throwback because that's kind of an overused term, but more of a traditional based product that's going to appeal to generations, hopefully. And I'm just looking at the time; we're almost done. But William, I wanted to ask you before we concluded. The first time I heard your story was on the 605 Super Podcast with Brian Last, and very, very
Yeah.
gripping episode, very enthralling. And I just wanted to know how that came about, and what your experiences have been from that initial seminal broadcast.
Well, there was a posting out on Kayfabe Memories that was talking about it. Izzy Slapowitz was out there on Kayfabe Memories talking about it, and I wrote the story up there, and that was in the early 2000s. And then somebody, Scott Teal, had asked Bob about it, and they did a thing for his promotion, or for Scott's promotion, his Shooting with the Legends series. And they talked about it. And then somebody had mentioned it on Facebook. So I put a picture of the check and the flyer and the ticket stub that I had from that night out there. This young man named Joshua Greenbaum, who I need to give a lot of credit to because he's the one that brought me back into the light on this thing. Brian Last saw it there, and he got in touch with me and asked me if I wanted to come on 605 and talk about it. And I said, sure, that'd be fine. And we did, and it was about a month later. And here's what really got me about it, was that Brian also co-hosts The Experience with Jim Cornette. And they were previewing upcoming stories for this. And the Bruce Sugarhold and this guy and stuff like that. And Jim Cornette was like, where the hell did you find this guy? This is a really famous story. And I mean, my jaw just hit the floor. I mean, I'm like, Jim Cornette knows this story. I hadn't talked about this thing in like 36 years. And I come to find out that there were several podcasts out there that had talked about it. X-Pac had talked about it with Lanny a year before. I even talked about it. There was, I can't remember all the other people. I wish I could. But it really surprised me how many people knew about this. And then we did the story, and my Twitter feed blew up. I mean, I had 39 people it went to almost 9,000 people. It was crazy. I mean, it was a dark house show, and it was something that they never aired, and we just never talked about it. And somehow it got out there to everybody. And Jim said it was, famous in the Tennessee Valley, maybe in wrestling in general, is what he said on Brian's show. And it just astonished me how many people have wanted to talk about it. Some people have told me where they were when they heard the story. It's crazy. Excuse me. But I'm really, really appreciative of all the love I've gotten from the people, and all the people who want to know about it. And I really appreciate the fact that people want to know about the martial arts and about the old school aspect of it, which I think is something they really need to bring back. It's just something we're missing right now. And it's like, I get to meet great people like yourself. Like, if it had just been me, I would have just been gone off into oblivion. But I am really appreciative of all the notoriety it's gotten, and all the nice people, and how nice everybody's been about it. And I thank you guys for having me on the show too. And I just want everybody to have a great time. Go out to your local independent promotions and support them. Those guys work really hard for a living.
Absolutely. So where can people find you on social media, William?
Well, on Twitter, it's WHARDINGKY. I'm on Instagram. I don't really, no, I'm not on there very much. I'm also on Facebook, William Harding. I'm not that hard to find, but Twitter mostly. Even with all the changes, I'm still on there.
Awesome. Well,
Fight the changes.
I want to thank you very much for taking time out to appear tonight, and continued success with your endeavors in pro wrestling. And yes, as William said, please, everyone out there, support independent wrestling. King, do you have any final thoughts, sir?
Yeah, sure. A couple quick things. The technique itself, we're going to have Eric Paulson on and this next week. And the technique that Bob Roop used, we often call stockade. And I'm going to be demonstrating that at Fighting Edge, how you could do a punch choke from there, and also how you could do another neck crank from that position where you come up under the head and over the arm. We do it out of a cradle. And one of the things that Pops taught me years ago, Billy Wicks taught me years ago, was to reach back at the ear and pull. It's a really nasty, nasty neck crank. I taught it to a fighter named John Ricard that I was coaching in South Carolina years ago when he actually won his first pro fight. He was a beast, beast collegiate wrestler. Won his first fight with that hold. So these holds are part of our lineage as wrestlers, as grapplers. And I also want to say I'm very excited to have Phil Baroni, my client, the New York Badass, who was UFC and Pride standout, who we had on recently, to be coming up to Great North Wrestling to be taking on Teddy Hart in an upcoming fight, the bad boy of MMA versus the bad boy of professional wrestling. And I can assure you people that you will be on the edge of your seat leading up to this match and the match itself.
Well, gentlemen, thank you very much once again. And King, you know what that time is, sir. It's time for the tagline.
Yes. Silver Sages, spreading knowledge to the younger ages. Good night, everybody.
Take care.